Hi, Mark.
Hey, let me, there's Madeline. Hey, how are you?
Hey, you couldn't find me.
Well, I was on the live stream page. We're live streaming, by the way, so
Oh, okay.
just want to make sure that everybody knows.
How are you?
Doing okay, thanks. Yeah,
Good.
it's same old, I guess, with this job. How about
Yeah,
you?
same
Everything
old
okay?
school. Yeah. I'm waiting for things to change. It's just the elections is not coming soon enough.
Yeah, and I think we're putting a lot of stress on that election, you know?
Ah, yeah, I've been trying to. I'm working the polls, and I've been trying to find out about the training, and I can't get a hold of anyone. They can't find a building to do the training. So I said, "Why don't you do Zoom?" You know, I know it's the Board of Election, but
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they arrange that, right? Although, what did they do in June for the primary? Did they do training?
it was bad. It was
Yeah.
bad. I didn't feel safe health-wise the way they set it up.
Was it in person?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were too close to the voters. We were too close to each other. And at the end of the evening, I'm usually chair at a table, and I tally up the votes. They turned off the air conditioner. It was so hot.
Oh,
I went to the coordinator. I said, "This is not safe." I said, "You could dock them if you want to, but I'm leaving, and I'm frightened." You
yeah.
know,
I don't
because
blame you.
everybody was milling around.
What did they do about training though? Did they do that in person too?
Well, they didn't do it for that one, but they will do it
Oh,
for the general.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Louisa.
Hi, Louisa. Unmute.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Madeline.
Hi, Louisa.
There are a bunch of people signed up for this meeting tonight. I'm not sure if they're here for the agenda or if they have another thing they want to talk about, but just FYI.
Thank you.
I was noticing that on the Zoom page that I click on.
So you mean I can't fall asleep?
Well, if you do, you have to turn your camera off.
Yeah. Thank God for that.
Yes.
All right. I'm gonna go get some water before we start.
That's a good idea. Maybe just the three of us.
Yeah, it's just well, four of us now.
Their neighbors or voters.
Hi, Susan.
Really.
Hey, Susan.
Hey guys.
And hello, Ira.
Hello, Ira.
Okay, I'm going to start the webinar. That'll allow the attendees to start joining us too.
Oh, no.
Although you don't have a quorum just yet. Just make
Mark,
sure-
I have a question.
Sure.
For DNS, it says that we need the 3 top priorities, but looking over what we've done for housing before is we have a list of 7 or 8 different priorities.
Mhm.
Which are we supposed to do?
It's
So,
the top 3 for everybody.
I'm sorry?
It's the top 3 for the whole board. So you can list whatever you want and then the board picks the top 3.
Okay,
so tomorrow night, I think Cindy's going to lead us through a discussion about planning to have the top 3 in advance, and then we'll do our usual process of budget priorities, going down, 20 expense and 20 capital, trying to get a head start on that, because when Cindy goes to put the DNS into the website that the Department of City Planning requires of us, it asks for the top 3 overall priorities as well as budget priorities that we discuss later on. Okay, let me see. Okay, let's see. We are recording, good, okay. We're live streaming. Where's Melissa? Melissa's here.
good. We have a quorum.
You have a quorum, you have 2 co-chairs, and so I will mute myself and say welcome to Community Board 7 and thank you for being.
All right. Good to see everyone after the summer.
What summer?
I know. So the agenda had 2 things on it. The first was about NYCHA and how we could sort of refocus our efforts as we, look forward this year. So Louisa, Madeline, Mark, and I had just a quick conversation about what could be a useful and helpful way to really recognize and perhaps answer some of the needs of the NYCHA community in CB7. And we were all kind of inspired by, what they had done at Fulton Houses in Chelsea, where they had formed a working group. And though that was a slightly different situation because that development was facing a series of, I think, infills and new construction projects, we still thought it's a helpful model. And we also wanted to discuss just how we can get other stakeholders beyond NYCHA residents interested in, moving this forward and advocating on the issue. So we kind of split up doing some initial outreach conversations to get more information. Oh, and I should add, this is all in the context of the blueprint that was released by NYCHA in, I think, August. This sort of re-envisions how like the corporate structure of NYCHA could work, and that they would form something similar to like the School Construction Authority that would manage the capital projects of NYCHA. So actually, Mark, it would be helpful if you can tell us quickly, you were on the webinar that NYCHA Intergovernmental Affairs did, correct? Was there any?
I was.
You learned about like implementation or community consultation that should inform our work?
I didn't, let me back up for 1 second, because I noticed that among the attendees are several TA presidents, so I want to acknowledge and thank them for being with us. And at the right point, Melissa and Louisa, you can figure out how you want to handle public comment and so forth, and I'll be glad to facilitate. The presentation webinar that I attended had a lot to do with the mechanics of it and how they see the implementation of their proposal. And they kind of acknowledge that there have been a lot of different proposals that have been made over the last several years, and that this one seemed to have been, first of all, a lot less radical than some of the others. and also seem to have involved or contemplate the involvement of more direct input from the actual residents who live in night shift facilities, both of which seemed like pretty good ideas to go forward. I'm seeing a message in my. Okay, looks like folks who are among the attendees would like an opportunity to comment. So whenever you're ready to open that up, we'll certainly make sure that we hear from everybody who
Sorry,
wants
Mark,
to speak on this issue.
Where are you seeing that? I'm not, so
I just got a text from somebody who said that they would like to comment, so I'm sharing that.
Okay, if you guys could type it into the chat or the Q&A, because, you know, Louisa and I are co-chairing the meeting, so if, you know, you want to be promoted, please let one of us know and we'll make sure you have a chance to speak.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to cut you off. Is that?
Not at all, not at all. So the thrust of the webinar was a combination of trying to do things with much more visibility and accountability than previous efforts have been. I think that a lot of folks have commented in previous of your meetings how other NYCHA proposals dating back many years now were done offline and then were sort of presented as opposed to a request for input to design. And they're looking for, it seems like anyway, that they're looking for a more holistic approach that combines an opportunity for new jobs to be brought to the NYCHA community, along with energy efficiency and green building technology, along with the opportunity for having health services right there on campus. And of course, the whole point of this is to shift funding from Section 9 funding, which seems to have been dwindling for years and years, into Section 8 funding, which everyone seems to be confident is harder to cut, harder to circumscribe, and so forth. Those are my impressions of what. Oh, and the other thing though that I will say is that one of the things I heard on that webinar, and I'd be interested in other people's understandings of this too, was in effect the focus was to start with the unit that people live in and move outward from that in terms of trying to meet needs, especially capital needs and repair needs. A couple of years ago, at a budget consultation, I understood, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I sort of heard NYCHA was talking about, NYCHA management now, is talking about trying to fix things from the top down, from the outside in. So the roof and the walls, and then eventually they would get to, you know, sinks and bathrooms and kitchens and so forth. And in terms of the residents' experiences, this seemed like it was trying to be responsive to those kinds of concerns of what it really feels like to live in these buildings and to have needs not met for some period of time. So I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but that's the best I can offer you in terms of my quick summary of what that webinar was about.
That's helpful, thank you. Okay, so I could just briefly speak to, again, what our discussion was back in August, which was sort of how do we pull together the right stakeholders, and then also how does this blueprint fit into what our work should be. And I think we just wanted to have some initial touch point conversations. Madeline, Louisa, Mark, do you have anything you want to report out about, you know, whether people had interest in potentially participating in some future?
On what Mark just said, that the trip we took to Cambridge is the same principle. And that's where Greg Ross was when they initiated their program. They took residents out, and they took them all in the building, all the residents together. It's not one over here, one over there. They took bus loads in other apartments, and they fixed their apartments. Like Mark was saying, they would fix the bathrooms, and they had terraces, which was beautiful. Public housing have terraces, and they did the work there, and then they brought the tenants back. It wasn't like misplaced in a building here and a building there, or you staying in the building. They made sure everything was great for them in the transition that they were going through. So I think it's a good idea.
How did they organize the tenants to be involved in this working group?
They had a fantastic tenant association. I met them also. And they work with the developers, not the developers, the contractors. They don't call it NYCHA. I forgot what they call their particular.
Whatever.
Yeah. So they all met. They had several meetings over. Roberta, if I can remember.
They had like 25 meetings. They met with the Cambridge Housing Authority, held meetings constantly with the tenants, including one building that was more seniors. They wanted to put in showers instead of baths because they felt it would be easier for the seniors to have showers, and the seniors were against it. So they fixed one apartment with a bathroom with a shower, and then all of the residents took turns going into the bathroom to see the shower, and they all voted unanimously that they wanted the shower because they didn't realize how much easier it would be for them. They also did that on in one of the other buildings about a different item where they wanted to have a little opening in one place, and the residents weren't sure they liked it, so they fixed up one apartment. But they met regularly with the tenants, and
they voted on solar panels. They had panels on the roof. It was really a great process that they went through.
And Gregory Ross is well aware of the process.
Okay, but are they applying it? I mean, how did
Not yet.
No, I didn't think so.
Not yet.
Maybe
Oh,
this is.
Which they've already applied it.
No, I know, but I meant for New York City.
No.
So if we think that this is a great idea, and
Well, I personally, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I personally think it's a good idea.
Sorry, just to drill down on what you guys think is important to be implemented here. Was it the engagement process, or was it the apartment renovation process? Was it the piece of like kind of having model apartments people could look at?
All of it.
All of the above.
All of it.
I think you start with the engagement process because that's
Exactly
where the design comes from.
Right.
I was going to ask, this is Jeanette. I was going to ask, did the engagement process involve a consultant, or did they work directly with the housing authority?
Good
The
question.
people in the Housing Authority in Cambridge are some of the most incredible people I've met.
Yes.
They really did not need an outside consultant. They really had already established a close working relationship with the tenants. There was never, an us versus them kind of. So they knew the tenants ahead of time. They had a good working relationship with them, and they just developed an even stronger relationship.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
I
and
think
I'm sorry.
in New York, where you don't have that kind of relationship, you might want an outside facilitator.
Well, and one of the things that the blueprint does seem, and I'd be interested in other folks' take on this, but it did seem like the blueprint was what was committing to or premised upon having decisions being made at the local level as opposed to, which sounds a lot like what you're describing with respect to Cambridge as well. So I don't know if maybe they learned the lessons from the partners up north, but that is a part of the blueprint as I understand it, and as they were presenting it.
Yes.
And then, sorry, I know I asked this already, but maybe I missed the answer. Was there anything said about like implementation process? If it is going to be more community and locally driven, like what would that look like? When would that happen? Anything like that? Was that provided? Because that would be like, to me, that's the jumping off point for like where we could potentially be helpful and like convening stakeholders.
Melissa, the concern is that you don't move people very far away, because then they're not near their family, they're not near their resources.
Yeah,
So-
Roberta, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to drill down on that right now. I'm just trying to ask about the engagement process and whether NYCHA has put forward an idea for how that would look,
But
or
Mark would be better to answer that since he was on the webinar.
that's, yeah, right. I was asking Mark here.
And I don't have a note on that. I'll have to loop back. It'll be interesting to know if any of the TA presidents who were with us tonight, for example, have been approached by this or in connection with this, or whether that's something that we can be
Yeah.
useful in trying to make sure that that happens at a local level, since they seem to be committing to or premising their initiatives on the local level. Who better than the folks right there in our district?
Yeah, that's a great segue. I also just want to make a comment before we open the floor, and I actually should have just started the meeting with this. Please, let's all speak to each other respectfully. I know we have very strong opinions, and housing is like a very tough issue to discuss, but please, let's try to be respectful to our peers and our fellow community members. So with that, I would love to hear from NYCHA tenant leaders, tenants, whomever, especially if you have feedback on the process and whether you've been consulted. And I don't know if the two people who raised their hands already wanted to speak on this specifically, but I'll start with Carmen and unmute you.
Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone had a blessed weekend. I've been actually in contact with Greg Russ and about the blueprint. There are a couple of things that we're looking at. The Section 8 that is being proposed would not be transferable like traditional Section 8 vouchers. Tenant participation vouchers will not have safeguard protections to ensure the rent stay affordable and protections from evictions. However, currently under HUD 964, we have guaranteed regulations and grievance protections. The Section 8 TPA vouchers are only attached to your apartment unit. If you decide to move away from your NYCHA apartment, the unit will no longer have the Section 8 TPA voucher. You cannot use these vouchers to move out of the state or to any other development. The Section 8 vouchers are not transferable. With these current proposals, there will no longer be public housing developments in New York City. Public housing will be privately owned and operated by private investors and banks. If the federal government under this new program doesn't fund these TPV Section 8 vouchers at any time in the future, the residents will be responsible to pay the subsidies. Widespread evictions will occur across the city. Okay. Under these new plans, residents will be offered new kitchens and new bathrooms and cosmetic renovations, like always, of course, but it will not address the major repairs that our infrastructure needs. If Congress does not fund TPA vouchers program, will you be able to pay your rent is the question, right? We've been talking to Greg Russ for a while. A lot of this will be, we even talked about presidents, they wanted to do away with a lot of the presidencies, and again, our board, which is Danny Barber. And so we're working diligently. I like Greg Russ because one thing he does is he listens, and we are working diligently to make sure that these things are implemented in this public trust fund. So hopefully, a lot of the presidents are working diligently to make sure that this doesn't happen. Remember, public housing equals reasonable rent, right? 30% of your income with federal protection. With the NYCHA Trust Project based TPV vouchers, NYCHA residents will not have rent protections. These are things that we really need to look at. There's a lot of things that we really need to look at before we say yes. I spoke with HUD officials also who are right now are not on board, are not saying yes to this plan.
Why not?
This is going to be something that maybe in the next 5 years will take place, but Russ is definitely listening, and we're working diligently with presidents to address our concerns and the concerns of residents.
So thank you, Carmen. That was super helpful. Just to return to the original question, it sounds like there has been some initial engagement that has begun. And I don't know if that's more just like a general, you have a constant kind of running line of communication with Greg Russ, or if it's focused around the blueprint rollout.
Exactly. It's focused around the blueprint. But again, you know, there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. And a lot of the protections is really where we at. Because a lot of us are really looking at home ownership and, you know, resident management. And so that's something that we have put on the table. We're looking at it. There's a lot of things to look at. Because one thing I can tell you is he listens. He's very engaged with the presidents, and I like that about him. So I really don't have anything bad to say about him. I think that the plan can work if we all sit down and work it together. But there are a lot of provisions to this public trust that we really need to look at. Because when you talk about going from Section 9 to Section 8, we lose a lot of our protections.
Right. Definitely hear that concern. And I think that's something important to work through. It sounds like that it could potentially be thought through and maybe some kind of solution could be formulated for it. So that's a helpful thing to focus on.
Could I jump in for a second there?
Sure, Mark.
Thank you. Just real quick, thank you, Carmen, for sharing that. What I'm hearing, because you know the documents that have been produced try to speak to some of the issues, and what I'm hearing from you is that more work needs to be done to make sure that everybody's comfortable that what is being proposed is what will actually happen. Has that come up in your conversations with whoever it is you're speaking to, with Russ and with his
Yes.
work?
A lot of it has come up, even with HUD. I've spoken with HUD. And we are, you know, our thing is, you know, we cannot afford to lose our protections. That's number one. We have so many seniors living in these developments, and we really have to look out for them. Again, and to lose protections from Section 9 to Section 8 is a big thing. As we know, Section 8 has been in trouble for a long time. So we really want to really sit down, and a lot of the presidents feel the same way. And again, we're looking at equity, okay? We're looking at definitely, you know, resident management. Those are a lot of the things that we're looking at. Greg Russ is very open to that, to tell you the truth. He's very open to a lot of things. One thing he is doing, and he is listening. And so as long as the presidents are engaging in the process, I think we'll get through it. I like actually some of the things that he's talking about. What my thing is the protections, right? We want to make sure that we are fully protected before we go into a Section 8 that takes our protections away.
Right.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful.
Carmen, can I just ask, and forgive my ignorance, but is this federal legislation that has to be passed? Can it be done in the city? Can NYCHA just put in new rules and protections by itself?
Well, it's legislation that definitely has to be passed.
Federal
Again,
legislation.
yeah, it has to. Yeah, it has to go to Congress. So we are talking to the congressman and you know, looking into a lot of the stuff. We're making sure that they know what this partnership really looks like, right?
So,
because everyone can talk about what they've done, but the people that live here actually know what's going on. And when you talk about protections, we all too know about our 964 regulations, right? And so they need to look at that. We need to make sure that they're looking at that. And again, we just need to make sure that everyone is on board, that everybody knows exactly what's going down. right? Because one may say one thing and another may say another. You know, these are different infills. We've been doing infills for the longest already. This is another aspect of it, right? But like I said, I think that the ideas are good, except we have to really think of the protections and what do we lose as public housing residents, because under the 964 regs, we are protected. Once the protection for public housing, section 9 is gone and goes into section 8, we have no tenant rights under private and public partnership.
Thanks, Carmen. Mark made a quick suggestion. I don't want to put you on the spot, Erica, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Has your office at all like waded into this blueprint, and do you have any idea about like a state legislative piece that would be required to enact parts of this plan?
I honestly do not yet.
Totally
No. I can check with the legislative team, but this hasn't come up at all as proposed state legislation. So I haven't even heard of anything of it, but I can find out for you guys for sure.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, let's dig into that and return to it in our subsequent discussions about like what are the federal, state, whatever legislative pieces. I don't want to get too caught up in that right now.
Anything you guys need, just let me know.
Really appreciate it, Carmen. Cynthia, you've been waiting patiently. I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, hi.
Okay, so first of all, we have to realize that while you guys love Cambridge, Cambridge is under the RAD program, which is Rental Assistance Demonstration. It has nothing to do with the blueprint. Greg Russ has 3 things going on: RAD, PACT, and blueprint. Now, under PACT, that is Section 8. That is privately managed. And New York City is not Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cambridge was done with RAD on a small scale. Yes, it was beautiful and gorgeous and all those great things, but that can't be applied here. What was applied here was Ocean Bay. That is the Cambridge version for New York City, Ocean Bay. And if you don't know, there has been an outsource of problems at Ocean Bay. Number one, they have the highest eviction of all the NYCHA developments since they came under the RAD program. Okay, that's first problem. Second problem is all the agreements that NYCHA was supposed to adhere to under the Southern District of New York becomes obsolete once you get put into the RAD program, which means NYCHA no longer has to do mold remediation or any of that they are being compelled to do during the Southern District of New York's rules. You are removed from that immediately. So while they do give you brand new refrigerators and do a huge cosmetic upgrade, the new boilers they got, the elevators they got was all FEMA money. That had nothing to do with RAD money. And yes, we have, as presidents, talked to Greg Russ a million times. And if there's one thing he always brings up is Cambridge, Massachusetts, because he's used to doing small developments. He was never in New York before. This is his first time dealing with a large city. And we are on a scale that is nothing like Cambridge. So you're not going to get the small, intimate quality of life that Cambridge has to offer here in New York City. Believe that, number one. Number two, with PACT, which is Permanent Affordability Commitment Togetherness, that they have slated just for Manhattan, that's 62,000 apartments. And under PACT, and I keep asking you guys to reach out to Wise Towers, to Ernesto, that's currently undergoing PACT. And they have had problem after problem after problem during COVID. They are in what's called a Bundle B. Bundle B is also 338 East 29th, 344 East 29th Street. They went and got a lawyer because they have been mowed over by Greg Russ and this PAT problem. So everything is not always silver linings on the other side. All right, if HUD stops funding Section 8 tomorrow, all these Section 8 vouchers will no longer pay the remainder of the rent, which means that a NYCHA tenant will not only be responsible for paying the 30% of the rent as they pay now, they will be responsible for paying all of their rent if HUD stops funding Section 8. If
Right.
HUD want to fund Section 9, which is public housing, what makes you think they're going to want to fund Section 8 for the rest of their lives? That's why we're being thrown into private management. This is a real estate deal. We are nothing but a dollar figure at the end of the day. And nobody cares if we keep our apartments or not.
We definitely hear you and we definitely care. I think the thinking, I don't know if this is, it's obviously you probably don't agree with, but the thinking is that Section 8 funding is more secure. I think it's
until Congress decides otherwise.
I think it's very unlikely it would be defunded, and that's the thinking behind using it to fund developments. But I don't want to debate you. I hear you and I hear your concerns, and
because I'm sure the same way. And they all lost their apartments under Cabrini Green. So you have to look at the bigger picture here. If it was done in Chicago wrong, and it is currently being done in Minneapolis wrong, what makes you think that everything's going to stay great in New York? Number one, that's the bigger picture here, because New York is on a scale and we have more to lose.
Yeah, I think you make a few really good points about New York being a very different scale and like magnitude of issue, and also that we are confusing a bunch of different things. And I do think that they need to be pulled apart, which is like RAD versus PACT versus Blueprint. And
well, PACT are almost the same exact thing. It's just that PACT is only designated for Manhattan. It's not designated for New York. Everywhere else it's called RAD, and Manhattan is the only place it's called PACT. And then when you have the blueprint is specifically designed for buildings that are now considered undesirable or obsolete, that it would cost more to repair them than it would be to put them into this TPT program. It has never been tried before. And if it doesn't work, then what's going to happen when all the buildings are deemed obsolete?
So Cynthia, sorry, I want to stop you for a minute. I don't see how the third party transfer program is part of this at all. I think I read in the blueprint that every single building is supposed to get a plan. So I don't know that it's supposed to be like only desirable, undesirable, but also, sorry, I don't want to debate. I appreciate your feedback.
Indian buildings that were not put into RAD. If your building was not designated RAD or PACT, if your was not designated infill or air rights, then it's been designated undesirable. And that's what qualifies you for the blueprint program. That's the difference that Greg Russ explained to us. You have to remember that the meeting that you guys are looking at, this being held now on the webinar, is being held by lobbyists.
What?
Run by lobbyists. Greg Russ is in on it. But the meetings we had with Greg Russ were entirely separate.
That's right.
On the webinar. And that's what I'm trying to get you guys to understand, which is kind of hard to do when the housing committee keeps, I'm going to say this real fast. You want to talk about being respectful? Respectful is when tenant presidents talk, the housing committee doesn't decide to remove themselves from the screen. Because if you guys were having your meeting on 87th Street right now, would you be permitted to get up and walk away from the table while we were talking? No, but that's why I'm looking at you on Zoom, and I'm also looking at you on YouTube, where I get to a broader picture of who's removing themselves while TA presidents talk. And this has been going on for months now. I've been doing a comparison. And you have board members that every time we speak, you remove yourselves from the screen, and shame.
Exactly.
Because I'm watching it right now.
Yeah. I hear your frustration. I think you could be right. Sometimes people aren't focusing completely. Other times, I think people have different technology capabilities or different technologies available to them. So don't
think that our voices count and they get up and they remove themselves from the screen.
Every time I'm on here, she does the same thing.
Well, it's not hers, it's a few more. But if you're a
Again-
housing committee and you were having the meeting on 87th Street, would you be permitted to walk up and walk away from the table when we're talking? So do you think it's fair that you do it every time we speak? It's the
Cindy
same.
and Carmen, I really appreciate your feedback and I really want to keep talking with the issues. I understand if you have some issues with our meeting management and you are free to bring that up with me, Louisa and Mark, but I prefer not to do it in this venue.
No problem, darling.
Thank you.
Okay, as far as what's going on with the blueprint is designated for those buildings that are deemed undesirable or obsolete. That's where the blueprint comes into play. Packed and RAD are for the other 62,000 apartments. If you're not designated infill, air rights, RAD or packed, you have now been designated for the blueprint. The blueprint is a public trust
Right.
where NYCHA has done a deal that once the trust, whatever bank decides to hold this money into trust, you still turn around and you hire NYCHA workers to fix things. Well, if NYCHA can't be responsible enough to do right with the money they currently have and the repairs they are currently supposed to be making, why would you set up a public trust and hire the same crappy people to do the work again? That is absurd. And that's what the blueprint is. That's the part they're not telling you on these webinars that we were able to pull out of Greg Russ when we met with him privately. He admitted that. And
So-
your guys are not getting that on the webinar.
I'm not sure I quite understand the last point you were making about the public trust and then the hiring of tenants. Can you just repeat
Okay.
that or?
The blueprint,
Yeah.
once you get the TPT vouchers, if Congress approves it, let's say they approve it and they're awarded it, it's 4 times the amount for each apartment. That money gets put into a public trust that is going to be overseen by the Bank of NYCHA's choice, or Greg Russ's choice, actually, because he's the head of NYCHA. So the money goes into a public trust, but then the trust, which would be the bank, turns around and hires NYCHA to make the repairs. And that's what people aren't understanding. If NYCHA can't make repairs correctly now, when they are essentially in charge of all the tenants, how are you going to turn around and let a bank rehire NYCHA officials to make repairs? That makes absolutely no sense. And that's what we brought up to Greg Russ. If the money goes into a public trust, then the presidents, there should be a subcommittee made up of presidents that decide who we are going to outsource this money to make repairs, because you cannot trust NYCHA to repair themselves. They have made a mockery of it for decades. So to turn around and allow them to be the ones that are going to be designated to make repairs again under the blueprint program makes absolutely no sense if we are not permitted to decide what vendors should be brought in to make the upgrades.
Got it. That was helpful.
I-
And I think just make a brief statement to kind of return to our original theme, which was like what could be a helpful way to have this conversation or for us to have a better understanding of what's going on. You know, it's a little bit difficult to piece together the information between just reading the reports from NYCHA and then, you know, we hear from the TA presidents who have a very different view. And that's where I think it could be helpful to have us sitting down at a digital table, I guess, at this point, hearing from NYCHA and then having you in the same room to also give your opinion and kind of like have that all happen in one place as opposed to very fragmented conversation.
Today, our concern are our tenants. We don't profit. We don't make any money off this deal. We are not real estate brokers. That is what the higher ups have a stake in. They are ensuring that their job is secured.
Can I just say something for a second?
Sure.
There are NYCHA pros and NYCHA trust cons, right? One of the biggest pros that we have, right, as resident leadership input, owned and operated by NYCHA, funded by HUD at state and city. Although funding has been cut, Congress continues to fund the subsidies to NYCHA public housing, which is Section 9, right? Now, in private, public and private partnership, it will be at the new owner's discretion to provide services, no resident leadership input at all. Owned and operated by private investors and banks. Under this program, if the federal government doesn't fund the TPV Section 8 vouchers, the residents will be responsible, again, to pay all subsidies under this new section plan. This Section 8 is only for the unit. It only works for that unit. You cannot take this anywhere else. That's it.
I hear you on that. The concerns about Section 8 versus Section 9 and about oversight on the public trust. So I think those are important questions. You know, I'm sure we've said this to you before in meetings, as a community board, we don't really have any power to make anyone do anything, but we can try to pull together leaders and elected officials to sit down and have conversations. So, you know, using that, you know, platform that we have, I think it could be helpful to, again, bring together NYCHA, elected officials, you all, and, you know, talk some of this out and hear what their responses are and discuss potential solutions.
Melissa, that would be great. That really would be great. Like that, everybody can hear it all at one time and nobody can say something different when you're not, right? Because these webinars that they have are based for different audiences.
And at the end of the day, keep in mind, Ocean Bay has the highest eviction rate since they were working the RAD program. Cambridge is not New York. Cambridge works. It doesn't work in New York when Ocean Bay has the highest eviction rate since they went into RAD.
Yeah, that's definitely troubling. And I think, you know, that was the first attempt. And I hope that, you know, through these conversations, something better can be.
What they did is falling apart. They got brand new windows that don't open. They got brand new radiators that are leaking. Okay. Out every other week. It's a cosmetic upgrade. It's a shiny penny with the same rotten copper in between.
And none of the pipes where all of the leaks are coming from. All right. The infrastructure is not being addressed. And you can paint it, you can do whatever you want to it. If you don't change them pipes, baby, you're gonna have leaks for the rest of your life. And it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. And so until they address the infrastructure, there is no deal. What is the deal? So we really gotta, it'd be great, Melissa. You got a great idea. I think we should all be in one room.
Yeah, Mark, I would love if, you know, you have any thoughts about like the best way to start like what the next steps would be if we wanted to try to do some kind of initial task force type conversation that would, or let me rephrase, working group, not task force. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that now I'm on the spot because
Sorry, Mark.
you know, I want to make one thing that in fairness to the webinar, and I am very attentive to what Carmen and Cynthia have shared about the different audiences to which the webinar was intended. One of the things I did take away from that was a recognition that state legislation, perhaps federal as well, but certainly state legislation would be needed to have protections, to continue the protections that they're promising. And I hear you saying that is first and foremost among any other issue, and I appreciate hearing that. In terms of answering Melissa's question about how to move this forward, it strikes me that the next step would be for us to have a conversation with elected officials and try to figure out the right ones to have partner with our attempt to bring folks together. I think the last people we need to bring into the fold would be NYCHA itself. And so we would try to figure out from our perspective, how can we get a reasonably sized group that can be nimble enough to actually have a conversation, ask questions, and get that information. Involve our TA presidents and as many other stakeholders as we can get, but certainly the TA presidents. And then to invite NYCHA to have a blueprint 2.0 or a blueprint follow-up or whatever the right way to envision this. And I would leave that to you and Louisa to direct on a more granular level. But my instinct tells me that if there are issues with what I perceive to be a well-meaning, even if not necessarily perfectly thought out proposal, then we want to have, in effect, all of our questions at the ready with a reality check from elected officials about what is and is not possible, and then to have that conversation with NYCHA. Does that make any sense to anybody?
Yeah,
If I could jump in and tell you what
Sure.
we've done before. So when we came back from Cambridge, we were very concerned because what Cambridge did was, it's not Section 8 when they do the RAD, it's a combination. So it's basically keeping it a Section 9. We were very, very concerned. We had several meetings. Madeline and I met with Jerry Nadler last January 2019 and told him all of the concerns when we came back. And his office has been very helpful. They have attended every task force meeting. They're well aware of all of the concerns about Section 8 and that you can evict people on Section 8, which you can't on this Section 9. It's harder. We were concerned that the building, if the developer who takes over a RAD does not care, then the development stinks, which often happens when people don't care. We've met with Victor about many of these problems. And I think going forward, you need Victor, you need Congressman Nadler's office involved, you need definitely the state senators and the state assembly people, because these are where stuff happens. You probably need Stringer's office for the audits. There's not a lot that we can do, but we can certainly advocate. And I think that's the main thing that we need to do. We do not have, we got 7 of the 12 community boards in Manhattan met over a 3-month period. We had 3 meetings. We tried to get Gail's office to set up a meeting with Greg Ross, which never happened. But I think right now, meetings are not that important, but I think advocacy on behalf of what we're seeing it's not good and asking for what we know is good.
Yeah, I guess just Roberta, to respond to meetings are not helpful. I do think that there's just like a need for us to all get a better understanding of what.
I think we can do that. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Meetings with Greg Ross are not always productive. I think we have to have a plan of what we want going forward. And I think once we have that plan, we don't want to see evictions. We want to see adequate development. We want to see the roofs fixed. We want to see elevators that work. We want to see boilers that work. We don't want people to not have hot water or heat in the winter. And I think we make a list of those things. I think we reach out to the other 11 Manhattan boards and we come up with a plan for our neighborhoods.
So I'm going to stop you just for a moment. Agree. I feel like you're right. We do know what we want, and also very much like what it sounds like NYCHA leaders and residents don't want, which are these cosmetic repairs, they want rights, etc. I would rather focus our effort on the developments in our district just to as a jumping off point. And I'd prefer not to start pulling in other boards and other electeds that don't represent our constituency. And I think we can revisit that later on, but I would prefer to start with like a working group that's really focused on like our local needs and kind of build out from there.
Totally. Because this is not something small, this is a big thing. And we need to start with home, right? Because we have enough issues here that we have to get together. We have enough presidents here that can sit down with you guys. We can run everything by you so you can see what we're talking about. Let's meet first, at least sit with the leaders that know what's going on and that are at the forefront of this. Because again, you're going to see a lot of different, let me tell you, Greg Russ had a webinar. And on that webinar, all he had on there were investors and bankers. I ran across that by mistake and kept myself muted and heard everything. Okay. And so, you know, this is way bigger than we really can imagine. Right. And so I think that if we can just keep it at home, like Melissa says, keep it at home. Let's do our district first, because we are in dire need of help. We are. And if we could sit down, everybody here is knowledgeable when it comes to the 964 regs. We have everything that we're good. We're savvy in our stuff. We know our stuff. So if we could just sit down with you, so that whatever you don't know, maybe I'm quite sure there's things I can learn from you, right? But if we can sit down at a table or on Zoom, right, and get these things on the table so we know what we're talking about before we invite the elected officials. And we really remember, a lot of these elected officials are on the take too, man. Not, you know me. See, that's why people don't like me, because I tell the truth, right? So we don't.
Let's not go there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go there. I was just gonna say that. But we definitely want to keep it at home, and so that we can at least address the issues that are happening right now before this blueprint is presented again, because it's being presented in so many different ways.
Melissa, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So I think as a next step, we can potentially do some outreach and try to figure out who could be like helpful conveners for these conversations. And again, this is meant to be like a working group kind of discussion format, not like a meeting, not like a town hall or something like that. And I think, you know, Linda's office and Jerry's office, those could be good places to start. You know, Mark, I might look to you for some assistance in lending your power of the chairship to those requests for.
So you have a real desire for being frustrated, because the power of my chair is, you know, it swivels. That's about all I can say for it. But I'm glad to be useful in any way, recognizing that that you and Louisa and many of the folks on this Zoom are much more familiar with these issues and with the fine detail than I will be. But I'm glad to do whatever I can to make sure that that's a productive conversation.
Great, and I think we can talk about like what the specific ask is. We can maybe like draft an email and workshop it and
yeah,
from there.
Yeah, and let's try to have that before the next housing committee meeting next month.
Yeah.
Although timing may be a little awkward with the way that, you know, it's a little late this month and a little early next month, but we'll make sure that this works. A question for everybody in my ignorance, which is it's because of the webinar and the documents that I've read, it struck me that legislative initiatives would need to be passed before this goes anywhere, which in turn suggests to me that we got a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong in that? Because if this is going someplace next week, I don't want the train to leave the station while we're still trying to figure out, you know, what car we're going to be in.
It's going to be a while before this passes anyway. Okay.
So then we have a little bit of time, if we use it wisely, to make sure that we hear from the right people. And then I think Melissa's idea of a bottom-up or grassroots inspired list of prioritized concerns, and then start working on how to make sure that each of those is addressed and figure out who will address which one. Roberta's point about making sure that the federal issue is covered here There are elected officials, representatives on this Zoom, so we don't need to reach out to the borough president's office, to the council member's office, to the assembly member's office, because they're already here. But we can sort of, I'm glad to work with Melissa and Louisa to make sure that that all happens.
Great, appreciate that.
And I'm willing to work with anybody that needs a list of what a lot of our demands are and what we've talked about, and whatever you need on that list, we can put it on so that we can address it.
Be great
that'd
to
be
know.
helpful.
Yeah, it'd be great to know what ground you've already covered, so that we don't get stuck in a loop, as you were suggesting earlier, Carmen, where, they present something to us that they've already presented to you and you've already found issues with. It'd be great to be all on the same page on that.
Amen.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna put this agenda item to rest unless anyone else on the committee wants to comment or weigh in before we turn to the budget and DNS.
I don't see any other raised hands among non-panelist attendees, so.
Great.
Whoops. No sooner do I say that than we have Lourdes, who has raised her hand.
Lourdes, you can unmute if you want to speak.
Yeah.
No sooner do I say that than we have Lourdes, who has raised her hand. Hey, Lourdes, I think that's you. If you could mute your live stream while you're talking to us, because there'll be a feedback.
Okay, how do I see it?
Should be a button on the lower left. No,
Oh, wait.
you need to unmute the live stream, not to unmute the Zoom.
Um,
You need to unmute the live stream, not to unmute the Zoom.
Yeah, Lourdes, you might have YouTube open, in which case you should just close YouTube and just use the Zoom and unmute yourself on Zoom. That might be the easiest.
Or just mute the YouTube if you can't close it.
Hey, sorry.
Great. I think we can hear you now. If you want to go ahead.
You hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I just have a general question. How do I know which the RAD, the PAT, or the blueprint is my development under? Because we haven't had meetings because of the whole pandemic thing, with my tenant president, so I don't know which one does Amsterdam Houses fall under.
And where do you live?
Amsterdam Houses.
Roberta, do you know? My understanding was that Amsterdam Houses is not in RAD or PACT, but I learned an awful lot tonight, so I want to make sure I got it right.
This is Cynthia.
Yes, I think I'm muted and got rid of my video, but I'm here. Amsterdam Houses is actively right now not in either program, and we have some major concerns about Amsterdam Houses. The good news about Amsterdam Houses is that they're very tight with Ghana Riverside, and Ghana Riverside is like the big angel watching over them. But I'm glad to talk with you, Lourdes, about it if, afterwards if you want. But our big concern right now is that they may sell air rights because it's in the prime location on the Upper West Side that was not prime when Amsterdam Houses was built. And we've been monitoring this, and as have several other organizations. So right now, people have their ear to the ground and are closely watching it because of our fears that air rights could be sold or buildings could be, the space could be used for other buildings.
Quick question, but Roberta, you mean that they would sell the air rights and use the money from the air right sale to fix the buildings? Is that what the concern?
They, as what happened with homes on the east side, they they were going to build another building on the property, which would be a multi-use. So some of it would have been market rate, some of it would have been affordable. And the amount of money coming in from that, selling that land and using it would not have covered the cost of repairing the buildings. So while they might sell air rights or they might knock down a building and build an affordable multi-use, which would have some affordable and some market rate. Our concern is that there wouldn't be enough money to pay for all of the costs that are needed for repairs and work at Amsterdam houses.
Got it. Well, with the current real estate market, we probably have less to worry about with area sales.
Yeah, but we are monitoring it very carefully.
Okay,
Okay, thank you, appreciate you.
Can I ask you a question?
sure, Doug.
With regard to city property being sold, much like, with the Fentner project, wouldn't air rights also have to go through public review process and community board input?
No,
No.
it's a different process. So the land is not owned by the city, it's owned by NYCHA.
Yeah, they don't go through ULURP.
And they don't go through ULURP. So that's one of the things that's a big ask that we should be asking for. That should be part of our, when we have our list of things we want. With certainly, Fred Douglass and Amsterdam houses are prime sources of landfill and infill and air rights.
Can I make a statement? First of all, Holmes was supposed to go under ULURP, which is why Gail got lawyers and is currently been put on hold because they did not go through ULURP. They have an HB action against the city. So nothing's happening with Holmes right now. And Fentner's been at a standstill. They have not been granted the playground as they originally de Blasio because they did not go through ULURP.
Home's a little more complicated, but it's sort of, kind of.
Okay. Okay, with that, any other questions from panelist attendees? Okay. All right, with that, I would like to turn to the DNS and budget, which are very much on the same, I think, general theme of our earlier conversations. We had a conversation with this committee, I think in June, where we just did some preliminary brainstorming of what our budget request items should be, or perhaps July, actually. And I just want to read off quickly what are the capital items we had identified, and I can also paste it in the chat and let me know if these seem wrong now, if there are ones we want to add. But so one was new front entrances at Douglas. I think that was to do with some doors not closing properly and security issues related to that. Another was restoration of HPD funding for affordable housing. That's, just generally for the district. Again, in NYCHA was trash receptacles for the brownstones of Wise. And then 4 was a virtual doorman system, and 5 was broadband for Douglas, Amsterdam, and Wise. So 4 was a virtual doorman system. 5 was broad. Okay. Okay, so just any initial thoughts? Anything you guys would like to see removed? That is just a jumping off point, sorry.
Cynthia, comment? Because these are very small, specific things. It isn't that they would be really good to have, but you're on the ground, so we'd appreciate your opinion.
Regarding what, the trash receptacles for the brownstones?
Yeah, I think Carmen and Cynthia were on the call when we came up with that list, just for context. But yeah, if you have any more recent thoughts or other items you think we need to be including, please.
Oh, well, that was basically it. We did the doors, we did that, the trash receptacles. It is up to the acting director of mixed finance to approve the money, which he's not doing. I can give you his information. But
So you think those items were funded?
Every area has what's called mixed finance. They're the ones that have the money for our developments. They have to approve things like fixing the doors, trash receptacles,
Right.
fixing buzzers, upgrading the systems. In Manhattan, his name is Carl Walton. He's
Yes,
the
it is.
acting director of mixed finance for NYCHA. Carl Walton is the man with the money. He decides what he's going to allocate money for repairs of doors that tend to get broken a lot and getting extra garbage cans put out. Since Mr. Walton has gotten the position, he does not speak with presidents. He does not communicate with us. He thinks he's on a higher plane, and he does not release the money, which is why we're all at a standstill with broken doors and no garbage cans and etc., because he refuses to spend the money. To get this man to even spend money on getting them to clean the buildings, we have maintenance workers that can't get mop heads, can't get cleaning supplies. That's a bigger problem than trash receptacles right now. Our buildings have not been mopped in 5 months. We have written countless letters to Mr. Walton regarding cleaning supplies for our caretakers, and he does not even answer us. So I went to Vito Musticellino, the general manager, who came by here and did a surprise walkthrough.
Yes,
And
it
I'm
is.
supposed to be confronting him, because at the end of the day, if you're not going to do your job, then someone else needs to be put in that position. But we can't get him to fund mop heads and brooms and cleaning supplies. And that's a shame. Our buildings are filthy, and I mean filthy.
Yeah, on that note, we also had, sorry, on the expense side, cleaning supplies and services for NYCHA,
Right.
you know, for regular maintenance and to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Right.
So that will definitely.
I think the biggest issue is that we are lacking in workers. Okay, we don't have enough workers on staff, and even now more so. I've been on a regular almost every day with Greg Russ and Vito about management. Management doesn't even answer the phone. You know, we have ghost town. So it's about getting more people to come to work. We have the same maintenance workers that right now, a lot of them are going out sick. Um, our doors continue to be vandalized, but again, they fix the doors and they break them. And every time they break a door, it's a lot of money to fix these doors. And I keep telling the residents the same thing. They break these doors like it's all right. We could sit here and we can talk about what they're not doing, but the residents have to do their job too and stop breaking these doors. Because every time a door breaks, baby, it's money to fix it. So,
Melissa, may I ask a follow-up question?
mhm.
Thanks. Cynthia was talking about releasing money, which made it sound like the money was sitting there and that it wasn't a budget request to fund these kinds of expenses, but rather a problem that that allocated funding was not being spent.
Correct.
Do I have that right?
Yeah, when
Yeah.
it comes to cleaning supplies, the money is there.
Wow.
He just has to release it to the superintendents, which he won't. When it comes to doors, that's a different issue because doors are expensive. So, you know, and even then, Vito has gotten aggravated at the fact that the doors have gone so long without being repaired because it's a security issue.
Sure.
It's a massive security issue, but cleaning supplies should not be an issue. And it is. When you can't get, and yes, all our developments, our caretakers have been hit hard by COVID. We are all severely under manpowered. But with the ones that are here, we can't get them mop heads. We can't get them cleaning supplies because, and I'll give you his email and everything. He's Carl Walton, and he's the acting director of mixed finance. The original director retired. So this is a man who used to be what was called a RAM, which was a regional asset manager. He is also, he's like assigned certain developments and he walks around and he decides what the issues are. Well, now he's got an even higher position where he is over the Rams and he still won't release the money. I mean, for instance, I can't give food out anymore. I can't do anything with my community room because we had a flood and our air conditioner broke. My community room is supposed to be a cooling center, and it has not been a cooling center at all this summer because I need 3 pieces put into my HVAC unit. And Mr. Walton somehow lost the paperwork for an entire month. And we still haven't gotten the 3. It's a belt, a little motor, and a fan to make the HVAC unit work.
Okay. No, I understand what you're saying, and it sounds horrendous. But this seems to me a somewhat different issue that we can handle separately, that we could contact him as the community board, urging him to release this money that has already been allocated.
Yeah.
But what we were talking about is budgeting in the future, which is the 2022 year, right? Right.
Yeah, Louisa, I want to also just kind of push back on that a little bit, but please finish.
Okay. No, it was just that looking ahead, what do we think that we will be needing, because we have to ask for that, and that contacting Walton is a somewhat different issue because the money is there already and we have to urge him to release it.
We have to
Can I
urge
say
him to-
something?
Yep.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I agree with Cynthia and Carmen saying what we need and the money's on hold and what we need. But I think NYCHA is looking at it. This is a pandemic. We shouldn't release any funds. They don't care about us. We shouldn't release any funds until we know what the city budget is going to be, because we're not getting any money from the federal government like we should. So I think they're just holding on to money, just like they're hoarding apartments that are empty. The same thing. They're waiting to see a better program in order to spend the money. They feel that we're not, I don't want to say necessary, we're not that important for them to focus on that. They're focused, look like they're focused on a bigger picture. How are we going to pay for NYCHA, and not even in the near future and in the far future? So I think they're not going to release any monies until they know what they're doing. There's going to be more cuts of services. I kind of think that's where that's probably going to come down in the future.
This money is already there. NYCHA is given, every development is given a certain amount of money for mop heads, light bulbs, light fixtures, cleaning supplies, gloves. That money is there. It's a simple thing of putting it on the credit card that every superintendent has in the development, and he won't do it. This is simple. This is not asking for it. It's there.
There is money being given by the federal government, $30,000, $30,000 a week.
A week.
Where is that money? That money is being given.
That's what I'm talking about. They got it. They don't feel that we important for them to use it. That's what I'm trying to say.
But that's different funding.
That's
$3 million
different.
a week is different from what they're already given in a budget for cleaning supplies.
They have that money, and we have to just, there's no reason why they should not let it go. It doesn't matter whether we don't matter or anything. I think that, we need to just push back on it. Right.
And I just, to bring us back to, what we're focusing on, which is the budget priorities for the next fiscal year. I hear what some of you are saying, in that, like, why would we make this a budget request when it's something that seems like it's already been budgeted for? But I would say to that our budget request is, again, just a way to elevate issues to people, to elected officials, to OMB. We're not going to get new things put in the budget, probably. So is this the correct vehicle to include some of these items that maybe should have been allocated funding or were allocated funding and it was not released, or is it not? I think it could still be helpful to include items in the DNS and then use that as a tool to push NYCHA, to push our electeds to make sure the money is released. That's my opinion, and
You're absolutely right, Melissa. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's there already. The elected officials can do a push and get it released. It's different if it wasn't there. It's there. There's no reason why it should not be allocated. So it would be very helpful. You hit it right on the nail, Melissa. We need to make sure our elected officials start pushing back on that and getting that money released as it should be.
And I don't think putting it in our budget priorities precludes us from also other kinds of advocacy, which could be reaching out to Carl and, you know, or having electeds reach out. I think it's just like one more tool we can use to advocate. That's my opinion. And, you know, I would.
We can do both.
Well, I'm in love with you, girl. Yeah.
Okay, any other items that people think we haven't touched on? Jeanette, I feel like you always have some good thoughts on the DNS and budget. Oh, those were just budget. Also, we had some notes from the DNS also that I will quickly read off, and then I want to hear from other committee members. So for DNS items, these are not budget items. They're just things that we think are important. One is preservation of NYCHA as a source of deeply affordable housing in Community District 7. So this is just like a general, you know, value that we don't want, you know, to be converted to something else. We want to make sure it stays as a resource for those who need it in our district. Then the second was the need for more newly constructed affordable housing and preservation of existing affordable housing in Community District 7, which would include senior housing, preservation of SROs, mixed income housing, and support housing. So those were the two like major DNS items I also had written from our last conversation. So if anyone wants to, Susan or Jeanette.
Yeah, I'm just curious, did you include rent stabilization in that, Melissa? I didn't catch it if you did.
No, what specifically? I guess I feel like a lot got dealt with in the 2019 changes to rent laws. So I like don't have much on my wish list when it came to that, but if you have things,
yeah, I mean, everything from last year, it hasn't been resolved. It's still hemorrhaging. So I would say that should definitely be included in that list of housing, affordable housing that you just mentioned. I also think perhaps something about the homeless situation should be included in our DNS. I don't know what can be done, but I mean, that's the elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned. NYCHA is a huge issue, but the homeless situation is becoming.
It's getting out of hand.
Well, this is supportive housing that we have to look into. And looking at what we did last year and the year before, a lot of it has to be updated because nothing is ever resolved. But we also should be looking at Mitchell-Lama and getting some updated information on it and how we can preserve what we still have. And also, maybe we could try to look into something of actually changing the rules. And so that any building that goes over a certain height must be 80-20. In other words, really, I know that it's not going to fly, but I think we should even start mentioning it. The fact that as a right, they can build as high as they want and in an R10 district and not be responsible for providing anything that benefits the community is ridiculous.
I mean, Louisa, I think that asserts a value that height is inherently bad, which I don't personally agree with. So
this isn't about height. This is.
But you just said they can build as high as they want without giving anything back. So it's like behind that is an assumption that height is bad, therefore they need to give something back.
No, I'm just using height as a vehicle to get 80-20, to get some kind of affordable housing included in market rate housing. And that's the most visible way, forgive the pun, for doing so.
And many come with as we lose light, but we've also lost a lot of housing, and I think Louise and I are going to try and look tomorrow at the numbers to see how much we've lost in the last year or two and figure out where that is.
What do you mean rent stabilized units that are now no longer unstabilized? Do you mean like demolition of buildings? What do you mean?
80-20, affordable, et cetera, because the older 80-20s, many of them have gone out of,
Okay, so expiring regulatory agreements.
exactly, a whole bunch of other, we're just going to take a sort of a grand look at.
Okay, that'd be great. And I'd love if you guys could present what you find at one of our upcoming meetings.
I think Ira wants to speak.
Sorry, Ira. if-
Ira, speak.
Ira, please.
I think you're muted.
Yeah. Why can't we at least start small in what Louise is thinking about and get rid of that stupid paragraph?
You cut out, Ira.
Ira,
Hear you.
we
I heard-
lost you after paragraph.
Yeah. And he's still frozen. It's always when you're making your point that it cuts out, I swear.
Do a stupid paragraph is what he said.
So
Am I
Ira,
back?
Ira,
lost
you're
you back.
muted.
no,
No, I'm not muted.
Oh,
you froze right after the word paragraph, I think.
There's remember the paragraph where they got the extra 30 or 40 feet for having one unit at 96th and Broadway, which we had a few months ago as a point of discussion.
Yeah.
Can we start modestly and get rid of stuff like that?
I don't disagree, and I don't really have an opinion because I don't remember the discussion well enough, but I just, I'm not sure, is the DNS the right place for that, or is it this a separate discussion that should result in a resolution or an ask for an elected to make a policy proposal?
I think it's probably both, but
yeah,
Putting
we should talk about that.
the DNS, the whole purpose of the DNS, in addition to, part of it goes down to the agencies, and the agencies answer some questions,
Right.
but part of it is a roadmap for what we're thinking and where we're going. And this year with COVID-19, with so many people, more people have lost their homes, they've lost their jobs. We have 2.5 million New York City residents who are food insecure every night. We have 100,000 students who are homeless. I think we really have to look at housing as a right, and really anything we can put in the DNS is value added.
I agree with all of that. And I'm sorry if I didn't, kind of start us off on that note that, I don't in any way undervalue the need for homeless housing and just in general creation of more housing that could therefore help lower rents in general. And I think, we should definitely, in light of the recent controversy around shelters and homelessness on the Upper West Side, make a point of drawing that connection between creating more housing and homelessness, and make that a really significant piece of our section. And I think
Absolutely.
our whole DNS.
Excellent, excellent.
Yes.
Oops, thumbs up.
Well, we're gonna have to see if we can talk to management over there and see how that goes. I can actually literally talk to the CEO. Yeah, I need to know if you can send it to me.
I don't know if she means to be talking on this. Okay.
And the other thing is that I'd like to focus both the affordable housing and senior housing, which also works with the homeless population, because the people that I'm seeing on the street, some of them are fairly elderly.
Yeah.
The homeless population is aging.
Yep.
This is Jeanette speaking. I don't have any great ideas to add to the district needs statement, except I was thinking maybe there's something related to it. I mean, in the summertime, it was cooling centers, but maybe in the wintertime, if people's heat is breaking or something, that there's more funding for emergency services, because people can't go and say shack up with another neighbor or something if there's no heat in their apartment because of COVID, that there's more services to fix things quickly.
Okay, so that would be a budget item for I don't know if it would be HPD. I think they do emergency repairs or complaints.
They do. But are you talking mainly, I don't know, like there are cooling centers, are you talking about rooms, areas that say the homeless could go in the winter without having to go to a shelter?
Or do you mean just people whose heat breaks?
Other than libraries?
Actually, I was thinking about how the city was providing people with air conditioners
Mhm.
or with students with the iPad so they could do their schooling online.
Okay.
And
Well,
if
that would, sorry.
Heaters?
So yeah, like emergency space heater provision if necessary.
Well, I think that would come under HHS.
So my thought was like I think it was last winter, like people went without heating for like weeks, or maybe it was at Queens Housing, not in Manhattan or something. But
It was in Manhattan.
yeah, so when you think about COVID and such, there, you know, the budget's going to be slim this year, but there might be something that can tap into if the federal government ever passes a new stimulus bill and such, that it could feed into.
Great. Okay. Susan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to really make sure that we include the same wording we had last year about the importance of reclaiming and preserving the rent stabilized units, because they're really diminishing. And then the other thing was, I felt like the comment you made about the homeless situation just got sort of shoved aside, not to be too blunt about it, but this is a big issue we just faced and we are facing in our neighborhood. And it's really, really important to me that if we have homeless people in our district, they need to get proper services. I mean, I don't know how you want to address that, but I think that the housing committee should be addressing this issue and should be discussing it. I'm just sort of surprised we're having a housing committee meeting tonight. We're not talking about it.
I'm not sure how we could address it more. Like, I think we definitely want to include in our DNS the importance of supportive housing, which is, you know, affordable housing with embedded social services for generally homeless people who have special needs. So I think that's a way we can address it. And then the other way we can address it is, you know, more housing generally, especially deeply affordable housing. And then, you know, things like you mentioned, like ensuring we have a rent stabilized stock, which serves as kind of naturally occurring affordable housing, which can help prevent homelessness. So can you say more about what you think we need to speak to?
It's two separate points. One is I would like the DNS, the district needs statement, to include wording about reclaiming and preserving of rent stabilized housing, because it's diminishing rapidly.
We always have that.
Fine, it sounded to me like maybe it was being taken out because, oh, we already addressed it. We haven't already addressed it. Ongoing need. Okay, great.
No, a lot of this is ongoing, unfortunately.
Great, okay. I mean, it's not great, it's ongoing, but fine. And then the other thing was just to say, it seems to me that the housing committee is the appropriate forum, or one of the appropriate forums, to discuss the homelessness issue that we've been facing. So I just, you know.
Okay, what about it? I guess, like, I think everyone has very strong opinions on it, and I don't really want to wade into something that we don't have like a constructive reason to address or way to address. I'm not sure what would be helpful in having this conversation. Like, is there something? Sorry, I don't know. I'm just not clear.
Can I jump in on that? Could I jump in on that?
Mark. I'm a little lost.
I got you. What strikes me as appropriate for this committee is to perhaps tie together a lot of what we're experiencing with respect to homelessness in general with your push for additional affordable housing of all the types of affordable housing that you're identifying. One of the issues that I think everybody can agree on in an environment where there's a lot of strongly held, perhaps differing opinions, is that there needs to be more affordable housing available so that when people who are in shelter or who are otherwise ready to live independently can actually find a place to live that they can afford. And that stabilizes all of our communities with diverse populations, socioeconomic populations I'm now talking about. So that strikes me as the right focus, at least as a suggestion for you, with respect to what the housing committee would be doing as opposed to what HHS may be doing, which
Right, I guess
probably
that's-
will focus more on the kinds of supports available and how it is we try to get people to accept those supports and how the outreach is conducted. Does that make some sense? I'm not sure if I'm.
I'll give you a specific example. I don't know, because it's hard to find out, but the Belle Claire, for example, I know had for a very long time a number of rent stabilized tenants in the building, and they had a rent reduction in place. It's been in place for like 25 years. It's a freeze on the rent rate because of reduction in services. And I don't know what's happened to those people in the Belle Claire.
They still
It
live
seems
there.
to me like the housing committee should be
Well,
discussing that. That's all.
but they are still there.
Yep.
It seems to me the housing committee would be discussing long-range issues and HSS is doing immediate services. We cannot construct housing, but we can advocate for it.
get-
Affordable
yeah.
housing.
I understand, Susan, I think you're concerned that maybe these shelters had displaced long-term rent stabilized tenants in some of the hotel buildings.
I think they're
don't-
still there in the Belle
I-
Claire.
Right, Louisa, I think you're correct. I've heard from a few tenant association leaders actually in those buildings have been part of the community advisory board meetings that were going on. So they did have a seat at the table. I don't think anyone was removed, but like, I hear your concern.
I guess personally, I mean, I'm a member of the housing committee. I haven't been invited to those meetings. I don't know. And you know, it's a frustration of not knowing what's going on. Whatever.
Those residents were not permitted to be, they're permanent residents. They cannot be removed. And I know that I've seen residents from the Belle Claire that I know live there. I don't know about the Lucerne, but I think it's a fair question to ask. And I think Mark probably could ask it.
I mean, I know that my building.
Not that you don't have enough to do, Mark, but
I know that in my building, you know, we face harassment from construction. And so I think in the Belle Claire, for example, that could be a form of harassment to bring in a large group of people who need a lot of help and are not being given the help. And whatever, it's a housing issue. Somebody else can, I've made my point.
it is a housing issue, but I know at the Belle Claire, I've seen some of the residents that live there and they still are there. I'm not familiar with the residents of Lucerne, but I think it's a fair question to ask.
In particular, I'm a member of the Facebook group, Upper West Siders for Safer Streets, and I've read a lot of comments from people who are rent stabilized tenants who live in these buildings and they're in peril because of what's happened to them. They're rent stabilized tenants who have been threatened by this influx of people. It's a housing issue.
I hear you. I see the connection you're drawing. I don't really want to entertain this here. I think this is a very difficult topic and it has been talked to death in our community. It's a temporary situation. These people are not staying permanently at these hotels. The rent stabilized tenants are not being forced to move out. You know, if they feel that they're in an unsafe situation, like, I'm sorry, that is really unfortunate. I don't think there's any stand for us to take here. You know, I think it's a public policy decision the city has made to relocate people to those hotels. I'm not gonna, I don't have much to say beyond that.
If I could just further to say that some of the rent stabilized tenants in the Lucerne were invited to one of these, a small group, we can't call it a community advisory board, but to the small group meetings, to at least one of them, and shared some of their concerns as well. That is definitely on the radar of the elected officials as all of this moves forward. I do know there are a couple of hands in among the attendees. So whenever you're ready to address that. Oh, and I see Ira is waving his hand at me at least.
And I switched computers, so hopefully I can finish the
You're better.
sentence
You're better.
without this thing crashing on me. So I don't know if either of the comments I'm going to bring up have been discussed at all or not. I think at one of the previous housing committee meetings, somebody brought up that some of the collegiate money was still out there and not committed to anything yet. So with that said, I don't know the answer to that. Sorry?
Nothing.
But I thought we were discussing the DNS, so that's not really
but
the DNS.
you can use that money to purchase a small SRO or make for one of the nonprofits.
Project Find has been using some of that money. Wish Fish has been using some of that money. And
I'm well aware of some of this. As you know, I spent many years working on the Wish Fish project, which was my lead into the next one, is that the 3-year window, and Shelley's not here to answer this, so that's unfortunate on my part, but the three-year window on the second garage on the third garage on 108th Street is coming to a close, where they said that was not going to be developed. So I just want to remind everybody that there is a piece of city land that is supposed to be available and in play per the previous ULUR. So
Isn't that the phase 2 of the project, Ira? It's not.
phase 2 of the project. So
It is.
if there's, I don't know if there's because I'm not involved with that project anymore after having spent about 10 years of being involved with it. So I'm just saying, those of you who are in the know these days, getting some funding for that or helping support funding for that project certainly could be something that goes into our DNS.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't part of the DNS because the funding was in place, and the reason that phase 2 hasn't started is that they weren't going to. They had made an arrangement with the community that they would not start phase 2 until.
I'm very well aware of that, Roberta, and I was as involved as anybody else was in that, though on a different perspective than you. Okay, so please respect that.
I don't hear any disrespect, and I would like to echo what Melissa said at the top of the meeting. It sounds like there is some, Melissa, it sounds like you were amenable to having some mention of this in your section of the DNS. So let's accept that and move on.
Yeah, and I think we should maybe just check in with HPD about like where things are. I think it's just not a bad idea to get a status update. And I don't know whether the second half was financed or not, so we can just double check that.
I'm
glad to work with you on that.
Excellent.
Okay, great. Doug, and then we'll jump to the attendees.
And this is just, I'm just echoing what Mark said, and also sensitive to what Susan said. I think we all agree that we have to preserve our affordable housing stock in many subcategories, including Mitchell-Lama and rent stabilization and rent control and NYCHA and everything else. So, you know, it is a broad stroke, you know, and it's very obvious, and I'm sorry to bring up, Melissa, what I agree with you has been over talked, but clearly that's, we've seen very, very, you know, with a crystal ball now, just, you know, how housing is such a problem. So yeah, so you know, preserving the stock and then building new stock, and there's a lot of subcategories. That's all I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think definitely that's, you know, our starting spot, our centerpiece, and I'll make sure that a few of you have mentioned Mitchell-Lama, senior housing. We'll make sure that those are included.
I just think that may be helpful just to inform the future. I used to be on the Mitchell-Lama task force. I was the president of the Mitchell-Lama TA. And one thing is that buildings in Mitchell-Lama that were constructed prior to 1975, by definition, are rent stabilized. Right. And because of the rent laws, I believe that stock is a little bit more, those that would be bought out have less of a likelihood to be bought out because the incentive is not there as much financially, because the housing stock can't be displaced now because rent stabilization is kind of locked in with the state law. So those buildings that would be built post 75, I think, are going to be a lot more vulnerable.
High risk. Okay. Okay. Just to jump to attendees, I don't want you to feel like they're not being heard. I'll start with Megan Martin. Again, I'm just going to ask everyone to be respectful to your peers, to our colleagues, to the community board, but go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much listening in, and it's just been very informative. So I just want to echo what Susan said, that we also have heard that the rent stabilized tenants in the Lucerne and the Belle Claire, they were not notified before the shelters were relocated to these hotels. So that was a deep concern of ours, and I'm glad that this topic has been raised. Yeah, actually, that is true. Everyone I can see on Zoom. So I just want to make sure that that's something that we all kind of are, as a community, have been addressing. And just that, since the topic was brought up, that affordable housing is definitely something that I'm happy that it's being discussed here. But hotel shelters and affordable housing are clearly not the same thing. Just this past week, sadly, 3 deaths were occurred in the hotel shelters, something that very disturbing. So, when we're talking about affordable housing, I just want to make sure it's not discussing them on the same line. And so that's just something that's really important. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Megan. I think we're all pretty aware of the difference between, shelter and affordable housing. Appreciate you still, ensuring we're thinking about that nuance as we put together our DNS. And, I think as Mark mentioned, elected officials are, cognizant of and trying to advocate for the rights of the rent stabilized tenants. So, Peter.
Hi, this is Peter Arnson with Columbus Amsterdam Bid, and I've got a one comment that I stuck onto the chat was about the ability to purchase buildings. It was done back a number of years ago by Goddard River's side of a building down in the I believe the 80s, the upper 80s, and just looking at that as a model for creating more affordable housing that was under local control might be something worthwhile. We have 3 hotels that were not addressed when there was the whole hullabaloo about the Lucerne. And 2 of them are on West 107th Street. One of them was mismanaged by Department of Homeless Services, and just it contaminated a really good relationship with the Block Association, so that they have been very antagonistic ever since, and distrust both Help USA and the Department of Homeless Services because of the way that was handled. So I would love to have the community board trying to re-establish a relationship there. I have one of my workers lives in the building that's not was not part of that shelter, but was next door, and it has been just about emptied and has very difficult, bad conditions, and it's a mess. The other one that I'm concerned about is the hotel on Central Park West between 106th and 107th. I don't know what the options are or the possibilities are for that property, but I would hate to lose it to if they decided to sell because they couldn't keep things going. I would hate for that to happen without our having a chance to take it over.
Yeah, I think you bring up something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is like, and talking with some of my friends about is there potential in this like horrific economic crisis, which has really crashed the tourism industry, for the city to support nonprofits in buying hotels and converting them to deeply affordable housing? And I think that would be a really interesting topic for us to take up maybe at a future meeting.
I will say that I think that the community board has a real role to play in mediating with local block associations, because Department of Homeless Services has just proved to not be a good player in this.
Yeah, Peter, I think it's generally not in our domain. It's more in the HHS committee. I think they deal more directly with shelter issues. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, and also then in the district manager's realm, but
that's correct.
But Melissa, if these could be, like Project Find or Goddard Riverside or Wishfish, it then becomes affordable, it then becomes permanent housing, which is different than a shelter.
Right, I understand that. I think Peter's making 2 points. I think one point was about poor shelter operations. If you could just let me finish. Poor shelter operations that have really fractured a relationship with a community because of how DHS and the nonprofit ran the shelter. And then the other idea is that if hotels were to be converted to housing, it would be great if local nonprofits could take the lead in doing that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And Peter, maybe you and I can talk offline about the first of those things.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take the housing committee's time now to do that, but you're absolutely right that that's something that we could at least take a stab at and try to be useful.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna, as a next step, Louisa and I guess, it's our role to work on the DNS for housing and try to circulate a draft quickly. I think the the budget priorities can be quickly kind of like listed out, but the DNS is always more of a process.
Right. And we might kind of delegate some, we have to upgrade some of the information. And so we may call on people like Doug, we might call on you for Mitchell Lamas, since
Yeah.
you have that background. Yeah, because the information must have changed from the time that we first put it in 2 or 3 years ago. So that would be very good, everybody.
Doug, you just signed yourself up for Mitchell-Lama section.
Sure, my knowledge of Mitchell-Lama when I was the active TA is dated, but whatever I can offer, of course, I'm happy to.
You'll have the contacts to be able to check things out. That'd be great.
Whatever I can, absolutely.
Okay, with that, unless there's any new business, I'd like to adjourn, but please.
I don't see any. So if anybody wants to raise a hand about new business, now's the time. Lourdes.
Yeah, I know.
I just have a quick question. How can I get in touch with Roberta Seamer so I could ask her more about Amsterdam houses?
Lourdes, you have my email, right?
I have you on Facebook.
I don't recommend it.
No.
My email is, are you ready?
Sure.
Mark, M-A-R-K.
Okay.
Diller, D-I-L-L-E-R.
Okay.
CB numeral 7. So Mark Diller,
Okay.
CB7.
Okay.
At gmail.com.
Okay.
And so send me an email tonight and I will forward it to Roberta and make sure that you guys get connected, okay?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you all. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think if there's no other questions or new business, I'm gonna adjourn us. Louisa,
Thank you all. Good job.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Stay safe.